It's the Bennie Randall Show. It's the Bennie Randall Show. It's the Bennie Randall Show. It's the Bennie Randall Show.
Welcome to another edition of the Bennie Randall Show. I'm your host, Bennie Randall Jr., a.k.a. The Motivator. And this powerful show brings you conversations with today's stars and tomorrow's legends. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. Come on.
It's the Bennie Randall Show. 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 I love the Bennie Randall. I love that Bennie Randall. I love the Bennie Randall Show. Yeah. I love the Bennie Randall. I love the Bennie Randall. I love the Bennie Randall Show. Yeah.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry about that little hiccup right there. Good evening and welcome to the Bennie Randall Show. I'm your host, Bennie Randall Jr., a.k.a. The Motivator, a.k.a. Global Entrepreneur and Investor. And it is my humble pleasure that you allow me into your hearts and your homes. You can learn more about me at BennieRandall.com, or make sure you go to Bashani Radio and listen to the rebroadcast of the audio versions of these powerful shows, or watch the full episodes on YouTube at Vanoy Media. All right. And just remember, we love doing this for you. And we want you to be inspired. We want you to be educated, and we want you to be entertained all at the same time. So we bring you some special people that can really bring it to you. I'd like to welcome Jodi Brockington. She is the founder and CEO and principal consultant for Nier Consulting, where she coaches and advises thousands of entrepreneurs and professionals in helping them launch, manage, and develop their businesses. Jodi's newest passion is Blended, a lifestyle community and platform that enables people with biracial and multiracial backgrounds to connect through personalized content network. As the founder and cultural futurist, a person who studies the future and makes predictions about culture based on trends and events, her impact will be felt as she leads the conversation on what it means to be biracial and multiracial in today's society. Recently, Jodi was awarded the top 25 Women in Power Impacting Diversity by Diversity Plus magazine. Jodi, we really appreciate you being here. Let me bring her to the stage. And thank you so much for being here. It's one of those things that people don't know how powerful this is going to be. Ladies and gentlemen, Jodi has entered the room. Okay, that's enough.
Thank you, Bennie, for having me on this
Jodi,
show.
This is going to be such a great topic that I think a lot of people don't recognize how much it affects the culture of what we're in right now. You know, intersectionality and algorithm bias. What does this mean to you? Explain that to my audience, and why do you do what you do?
Okay, well, first of all, just biracial, multicultural individuals in the U.S. can face a range of challenges that stem from their mixed racial and ethnic backgrounds. These challenges may vary depending on a bunch of factors, such as specific racial combinations, cultural contexts, and individual experiences. But some of the common challenges include identity formation, discrimination and prejudice, even amongst their own groups, belonging and acceptance, navigating multiple cultures, the pressure to pass, and invisibility, where you just don't know exactly where you fit in and people assume for you. And so intersectionality is one of those places where more than one of these things have play out. So I can, if you're Black and gay, or Asian and mixed with Mexican, and, depending on where you grow up, it can be normal. And depending on how hard your parents work to make sure that you understand your cultures and where you live and come from, can really impact how you are seen and treated in society. And so that's been my biggest passion, is always falling in between gaps. Are you Black enough? We all joke about taking your Black card. I'm on the, as I call it, the furthest ends of the spectrum, both Black and white, which makes gray. So you never have to guess who's coming to dinner at my house, according to Sydney Portier, and why I named my dog Sydney, because she's a gray Shar-Pei, although Chinese, but coloring. So, living in those gray spaces where I don't want to be put in a box. It goes to the census. How many of us have to check a box for so long, or I'm just 2 or more races and not Latino, right? Or Latina. And so all these things that society has created, and I would actually be illegal if the loving decision didn't happen before my birth. So there's things that happen culturally, politically, and then socially, depending on where you grow up, how you grow up. Socioeconomics is another intersectionality, from poverty to being, extremely wealthy. That's where Blackish was born out of, right? You can be Black with a lot of money, which gives you access to things that seem to be more mainstream, but you will still always be Black. Like, I am biracial, I am Black and something, I am Black and white. And people will then discredit you for one or the other, depending on how you show up. And I do have friends who can pass, who look white as the day is long. And I have others that you would just think that they are just Black, not mixed at all, until you actually get to see their parents, or they tell you, but you have to ask.
So let me ask you this then. How did this affect you growing up as a child? And did it direct you to where you're focusing on now? How was your childhood?
Sure. Yeah, for sure. I think I joke, people are like, how long have you been doing this diversity stuff? And I'm like, since birth. I was the first child born in my family, my mother and father. My mom was the second oldest in her family, married my father, who was Black. They met working at a department store, Gimbel's, that no longer exists. And diversity I was there as kind of a peace offering between my grandparents, who just didn't seem to understand how my parents met. I remember my mom telling us that my aunt and uncles never told my grandparents, their parents, that my father was Black. They're like, just wait till you meet Brock. He's great. And my dad is great, but they didn't say he was Black. And my grandmother, actually, on my dad's side, didn't, even till her death and with Alzheimer's, still told me almost to the end that she'll never understand how my father could have married a white woman. So I always felt like I was carrying some of this cultural pressure to make everyone feel comfortable. That kumbaya, as Chris Rock talks about hair, you got to calm it down. You got to be a peacekeeper. And since I was the grandchild that came from their children, they couldn't really deny me, right? But I felt like my mother was the one who worked really hard to make sure that I knew who I was. My dad was, Black man doing his thing in business. My mother was the one who made sure I had a dollhouse that had a Black mother, a Black father, a white mother, and a Black baby. And it was called a Sunshine Family. So my dollhouse, but there were no beige. Like, I was not the color of that doll. The doll was like your complexion, Bennie. But it was the idea that this Black father and this white mother made this Black baby, who is me. And I remember waiting on long line, and I don't remember if it was Macy's or Bloomingdale's, for a Sasha doll, which I find funny that that's Obama's one of his daughter's name. And they were beige dolls long before Cabbage Patch Kids. And there were a whole bunch of mixed kids waiting for these dolls, like the Cabbage Patch Kids many years later, but to get something that looked like you. And my mother always told me, and I didn't get it when you're, 4 or 5, although I was speaking at 1. She was like, in this world, you're going to be Black. You're going to be perceived as Black. That does not mean, she goes, believe me, I had you. I have a little cyst in my nose. I lost the tip of my nose when I had you. But in this world, they're going to see you as Black. And that's also who you should be helping. She goes, white people will get help. She's like, Black people are going to need the help. And if you can help more, women are going to need more help. Now, at 5, 6, 7, you're like, what's this mean at the end of the day? And then fast forward years later, my father was working at Home Box Office, HBO, from the very beginning. And, was part of Black ERGs and creating Black employee groups and NAMIC, National Association of Minorities in Cable, which is now National Association of Multiculturals in Communications. But he used to come home and talk about, back then it was kind of quotas, but he said, oh, if I could find and hire, back then it would be a Hispanic, gay woman, handicapped veteran, I'm good for the rest of the year. And I didn't really get it, but the fact that I can find 10 or more of those kind of folks in my network means that I'm in the best space possible. So the fact that I do diversity, equity, and inclusion belonging work now as a consultant is truly a product of where I come from, who I am, and what I believe in. And what I believe in really is just everyone deserves to belong, feel comfortable, and to be passionate about the things that they want to do and have if you have the skills, you should be allowed to do that work.
Mm-hmm. That is so powerful, man. That, it's amazing. Like, until you hear somebody's story, that you get an understanding of where they come from, and then it all makes sense now. Let's move into this algorithm bias. You would think in the time 2024, that, a lot of things have changed. But you know what I'm recognizing, Jodi? A lot of things have changed, but yet still remain the same. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And so my question to you is, now, algorithm, explain to my listeners, what is an algorithm and how is the algorithm becoming a bias tool when it comes to the human race as a whole?
Correct. Well, algorithms and all the AI materials that we keep hearing about, will we be replaced by robots and technology? And you see a lot of automation and roles that were human-led are now being replaced by robots, and or technology, and not at such a fast pace that human capital is not as important as technical capital. But that also leads to wonder, and not even wonder, who's been creating all of this stuff. And due to the fact that there are very few people of color, women, and other cultures and people who think differently around the world making and creating all of the AI, that it still has the same bias that you would get from humans. Mm-hmm. And so whether or not you come for an interview and they look at your resume and they look at my resume, they look at your name, they look at mine. Our names are pretty basic, but when they look at where possibly you went to school, but they still have to be educated enough to know, did you go to a historically Black college, or did you go to a primary white college, right? Did you go to a school that they know, oh, they went to UCLA, I went to UCLA? There can only be so many people, right? So back in the day for an interview, you would open the door and say, Jodi. But most of the time people would open the door, say Jodi, and look at the 3 white women. And I might not be directly in the line of the door opening. And when I say it's me, they're like, and the jaw drops, hits the floor. And I know that I'm going to get a second interview because they can't even get the questions going right because they were looking at the blonde girl, the tall girl. And even though I had the Urban League on there, I had all the things that to me were Black enough, right? Or that if you did your homework. But I went to UCLA, I went to USC, I was a gymnast, like all the things that don't show up so much now. We have that whole team at Fisk, right? A whole gymnastics team of Black women. You see Black women winning, right? Simone Biles, Gabby, the whole list. But things that were culturally white or mainstream, we could just call them. And so, then then are you safe? I tend to be more like a spook who sat by the door. Like my mama told me to bring all the Black people in when I get an opportunity. So if you let me in, that's who I'm trying to get in with me, right? Or trying to do that. But on the other side, I can't say that I'm always welcomed in Black circles either. Not Black enough, or they didn't know I was mixed. And my mother showed up at college one day, because it's far away from New York. I chose that on purpose. But she came to visit. And all I heard all day was, oh, so that explains it. So that explains it. So at one point I wanted to do a show called So That Explains It. So that explained why possibly I was able to go on all the trips, possibly why I dated a Latino guy, not a Black guy, although no one Black asked me out. Latino guy asked me out first. He was cute. He was smart. He was in my circle of my classes, not in the other classes with the people who had to make up stuff. We were in the accelerated track, right? I knew not to date any athletes because my dad told me not to. He's like, don't date any athletes, no fraternity men. As I'm getting on the plane, and I was like, why? He's like, because I was both. And I was like, I don't really get that, but okay, I'm going to go with it. So, people start then, they didn't know what I was, or they assumed one thing or another, but there was something different about me. Like, I wasn't Black, but a little different. And when, let's just say I was half Black, half Asian, and my last name is Kim. When my friends who show up who are mixed with that, intersectionality, depending on the last name, where they're growing up. Are they growing up in San Francisco where there's a large Asian population? Are they growing up in the South where there's not? Are they growing up where that's culturally sensitive or sensitized some? Are they one of only? Are they a lonely only? So all those things matter, and these algorithms can't pick everything up. And so I've done a few testing, like I've been in some trials for testing AI, where I show up white, whatever white seems to be, or mainstream. My features show up white. Everyone says I look more like my mother than my father. I wish I had a picture for you. I kind of think so. But, and then my voice is supposedly also neutral, regular, mainstream white voice. So it's not like they can pick up a tone. My intonation, I always told growing up, I'm sure you've heard this too, Bennie, you speak so well, you sound so, and they want to say white, or you sound like me. Where'd you go to school? And I'm like, you got to mess with them a little. I'm like, well, what school? Grade school, grad school the third time, undergrad, where? You gotta, because they're trying to get some information, but no one wants to ask the real question that they want to know. Where are you from? New York.
And since to that, Jodi, I'm just say, I've heard it upon other people. When I talk, they be like, yo, you from the South. What's wrong with you?
Well, yes and no. You have a very mulattoes,
They be telling me, you a country Bama. I'm like, okay, I'll take that, whatever that means. But that's what they would say to me, But I totally understand, and I agree how that comes across. So let me ask you this now: how is the algorithm being perpetrated in a biased sense? Is it because the people that are programming the algorithm are basically, conscious and unconscious training this software? Because AI is a software. Training the software to somehow not be biased, but just the lone fact that you're dealing with it, it becomes biased because the humans are programming it. Speak to that, please.
Yeah, I don't think it's purposefully being done. Just like I don't think anyone is purposefully being prejudiced or racist or anything else. It's part of what comes out of your surroundings. And unfortunately, those folks that are mostly doing the programming are mostly white or Asian, based on those who have those kind of careers in technology. The problem is not that they're programming it wrong. The problem is that there's not enough of us who are part of these trials and being part of the creation of some of this material and this software. And we need to participate more, just like with medical trials. And it's another area that folks like myself, who are of more than one race or more than one culture, often will be misdiagnosed for health things. So often now, the same thing with AI, you could be missed or mistaken for something that you possibly are not, or maybe one of the many things that you are. So just like a 23andMe tells you how much percentage you are of this culture, this race, where you're from, etc. And I did mine. My sister was like, hey, did you read it? I was like, well, I kind of know what we are. I mean, we sit at the table. We got black and white, 50-50. And it turns out that we're 58.7 or 57.8%, which is still more. She goes, we're more white than black. And she was like, oh, and I was like, well, you're dating all the white guys. I'm like, so, I mean, there has to be a balance somewhere, right? So the same thing happens with technology, that it's not that they're purposefully trying to leave us out. Although, there probably are some people. I mean, we know that there are people definitely are trying not to have anything to do with other people and cultures, but we can't hold them responsible. We also need to take on some of this onus on ourselves. We do have plenty of Black and other culture, technologists and scientists and people who can work on these things. It's having access and making it happen and the funding for it.
So, man, I love this topic so much because we can go so many areas with this. What I want to ask you is this. Recently, when we was going through the COVID time, there was a lot of diversity talk, a lot of pledges given to a lot of companies, from a lot of companies, big companies and small companies that were saying, oh, we're going to pledge to be more diverse. We're going to put $3 million to this. We're going to put $8 million to this. And Jodi, it just seems like it disappeared, or I don't know where the money went. So maybe you can elaborate on that. And number two, just in Florida with this, I think there's this university that they fired all the diversity people who was there to do this because of some law that was put in place by the governors. Can you speak to those two items, please?
Yes. So the first one, in terms of, you wanted to know, like, what happened to the money that all the corporations had pledged. And there was a whole CEO, I'll call it conglomerate, of everyone who was making pledges. And really from their heart, all from the whole George Floyd, people realized that it wasn't happening over there. It was like happening to their employees and actually people of color that they knew. Every company at the time I was inside, I was working inside and not for myself, and in diversity. And that was a challenge to kind of rise to the occasion and be able to be sympathetic and empathetic with those folks that were not part of. I mean, there was still the APPI issue. So the Asian, no one was getting a break, and everyone was finally seeing everything because everyone was still enough to watch some of this stuff unfold. So where's the money? Some of it was definitely invested and spent. I keep saying that there should have been a better task force to oversee that, whether or not it's the Urban League, Alpha, which is a Latino organization, Ascend, who that constantly are the nonprofits that most organizations and corporations are in partnership with to be able to have their corporate social responsibility, like those same watchdogs, those that you're investing in, along with your employees, to kind of look at it better and closer. But people did make their best effort, and every company was at a different stage and still are now with their diversity efforts, right? So I say diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging is kind of like a track race. And depending on what your company stands for to begin with and who's founded it, different groups are at different parts of that race. And the first group that seems to have gotten, ahead, and especially since George Floyd, even more so, was women, and women in general. And then white women are running around the track much faster than women of color. And these are all the things that are backed up by McKinsey and Gartner about what's going on in the workplace. But right now, the group that's really being forgotten the most are men of color. And because there's been so much emphasis on women. So the idea of what's gone on with that money, Some of it was invested in hiring people to do work for them. So from consultants to other things, papers, a lot of this research, people gave a lot of money to McKinsey and other organizations who were doing research already. And then they invested deeper into organizations that would fall under the EEOE regulations. So that's all of your groups of color, and then some of your groups of culture, even religious organizations, and then trying to reach back further to schools. As you saw, suddenly everyone needed an HBCU initiative. And unfortunately, they hired a lot of people who were not experts, but just looked of the group. And so now you've seen a whole bunch of chief diversity officers leaving, or people, as you brought up, the one university that took advantage of the decision that was made about affirmative action, and companies that are also following that same vein. And I believe, though, more people are still doing the work, but maybe not under the title of diversity. It's professional services, it's leadership development. It was all that it was before, but the world is getting a little bit more cultured, and by that, more colorful, brown, Black, and others. So it's the idea that those things are going to shift naturally. And all of these policies, whether they're in place, broken, or people decide to follow them or not, is really a personal or that company's decision. And you're either going to do it because you believe in it, or you're not because you don't. And the policy happening or not happening is not going to change that. So those who are steadfast about making change, they're still going to do it. And those who are not, we're not doing it already with or without these laws.
Very, very powerful. So I guess what I'm looking for here is very simple. From your knowledge and being in this professional industry of diversity, do you see change permanently happen, or do you see change happening in little increments when people get mad about it? When people started, somebody of influence brings it to the table, and then all of a sudden, oh, this is what we're doing now? Or do you see it going back? Because, I hear a lot of times, even in media, with us, it's harder to get, advertisers to support something that is, that highlights us in a certain way, which is more powerful and positive than it is if we were to put out imagery that was not so conducive of who we really are as individuals and African-American community per se. My question to you is, do you see these things been permanently put in place, or do you see these things being put in place in a very matter of fact, like, hey, look at us, look what we're doing, and then go right back on the ground and go back to business as usual?
I think there's some of both, Benny. I mean, to really put it out there, I mean, people were doing it or not doing it before. They got an opportunity to possibly do some new things or work with other groups a little bit more than others that they had not before, right? So not a lot of people were paying attention to transgender. Everyone thought that Asians were the model minority, which is really Kenyans now in the US are the ones who are killing it, but no one's going to put that out there. And so things are going to shift as they will. I think, everyone deserves to put a flag up that they're doing something great. But then are you going to have the momentum to keep it up, and the funding, and putting, are you going to put your money where your mouth is, or walk the walk and the talk, right? So I think that still comes down to the leadership. I think people are making individual efforts like they've been doing all along, so someone like a Robert Smith, who wiped away all of those college, scholarships and funds and paid, like that helped move those gentlemen forward. I'd like to see where those students are now that didn't have to pay those loans, how that impacted those families. Like, we still don't get the after effects, even of something good like that. And even from our own community. And then when someone does something from outside the community, sometimes people don't want to be known for it. Like they're not trying to put a flag up. Other times they're working on stuff it's going to take a while anyway. Like the stuff that the Gates Foundation's doing with health and Alzheimer's, and it's it's not like a quick fix. Philanthropy takes a long time. And I think that was also part of the problem of some of this original investment, is that you're putting money and time and effort into something that's going to take more time than possibly you might have. But as long as you get some small wins along the way and continue that path, you'll be okay. The problem is some people and organizations have lost some of their punch, some of their energy in that space. Budgets are cut, and that might be the first thing to go because they need to save something else. You saw how a lot of companies are downsizing. Part is automation and some of the AI and other things and that they don't need. They realize that they possibly had too many people. Companies are still looking for profits. And so there is profit in diversity. And that's what's really keeping some of the companies alive who are doing well. And we now also, the other intersectionality that we don't talk about, especially in our world, is we have 5 generations at work or working, from Z to the boomers, and a 6th will join soon, right? The alpha group. And those are the ones who are still single and maybe early double digits, not yet in the workplace. And that adds another layer of expectation and the way the world's working, is that you come to the world now and, who knows what a library is when you have Google or when you have AI. And and that's how you're coming in, versus someone like myself, who's an Xer, who, has seen all the things kind of change. It's like, oh, we had a regular phone with a cord, now a cordless phone, then it got smaller and smaller. And now, headphones that were big, and now the big ones are still cool, right? Depending on what it is, but all those changes. But if you come into the world now, you also see it differently and you see more diversity. So you're not expecting it not to be. You're expecting things to be like that and you don't know how, right? So it's
right. I remember we had to get the big encyclopedia that came to the door, and they was humongous. And then, you had to, look it up and go through it and find stuff that, and now they can hit one button and at their fingertips, they got a million options from searching anything that they want to.
Yeah, a card catalog, right? A card catalog at a library. They scared me. I didn't like libraries either. So
stop that. You're going to tell us. You're going to tell on us. All right. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to The Bennie Randall Show. I'm your host, Bennie Randall Jr., a.k.a. The Motivator. We'll be right back after this short break. If you get a chance, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you go to VonoiMag.com. That's VONOI mag.com, and support those who support us, who help bring this type of entertainment and educational resources for you and all, because you got to support those who support you. All right. We are speaking to Miss Jodi Brockington, and I'm telling you, she is bringing the heat, and you're going to have to rewind this, okay, to get some of the stuff that she is breaking down. But I think it's informative for us to know, and things that, when it deals with us on a whole level, because honestly, me personally, I think there's one race, and that's the human race. And I think that's how it should be looked upon. But of course, it takes each and every man to come to that conclusion for us to get there. Jodi, welcome back. Let me ask you this. You got to see the change happening when it comes, from diversity to the time to where you're seeing the new things that are happening right now. So What advice will you give to the younger generation that's only experiencing this through a digital age? And a lot of things are happening behind the scenes that if you're not aware that it's happening behind the scenes, you don't even see it happening. If that makes sense, you know what I mean? Whereas before it used to be like kind of right, hidden, but in your face, like you couldn't walk on this place because you wasn't this place. And then now with the landscape of the digital, it's made some people bigger than they would have did if they was in person, if you know what I mean. What is your take on that change of that landscape that has happened, and with the younger generation not even having experience of what happened back then? And I know this is a long-winded question, but even the curriculum are now being said, let's not talk about that anymore, because we don't want our children to feel this type of way or that way, when we know history is history, but we have to bring that light to the kids today. And now if they can't find it on Google or whatever, they're not really looking for it. What can you speak to that a little bit, please?
I think we'll definitely have lots of gaps of information. Yeah, no one's telling them to go look that up in the encyclopedia or, et cetera. But we're hoping that there are still grandparents around and others around, even in joking about, we were talking about the phones a second ago, or how things have changed, that there's a lot of stuff that have happened for them to get to where they are today, and not to ignore that. I mean, you brought up, things being kind of erased, or if it's not in their backyard and they're not interested, they'll just miss it, right? So Black History Month is only Martin Luther King still? No, there's so many people, right? There's so much stuff. And so what is a shame, and that same thing is happening with banking and financial information, that, I remember getting my first bank card and having to fill out every time I would, make a deposit. Now it's straight up on your phone. No one uses, and so I'm also concerned in that sense of where people are less attached to the things they own. But in this multicultural race space, the fact that, the middle class individuals with mixed race backgrounds, and the 2020 census, there was like 275% increase in number identifying in the since 2010. Because we were allowed to choose more than one box. And so those type of historical things, if you're not paying attention, I always look at what they're going to ask me on all these forms. But if you're only going to be given what's in front of you, and we have book banning, right? We have all these things that people are taking away parts of history, or things that they don't want you to see. But I still feel like for you to be a whole being, you still need to know some of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Right? You need to know your history to know what you've been up against, and why maybe you are that much more important and or special, or have gone through something that has led you to where you are today, good or bad, right? So I feel like you can't erase history, but it's the idea of who's going to tell it, right? And you're hoping that, what I'm hoping with Blended is that there's enough people telling it and curious about things that have happened in their own families and in other people's lives, or the families that they've created by crossing cultures or moving to another country and adapting to a culture. That doesn't mean you can't be of one culture and still have a culture clash somewhere, because you just don't know their particular ways, right? You go to France, there's things that you have to do in France. You must, always in a store, say hello, bye, thank you, all the niceties. New York is like, yo, where's this, right? And not that you don't have to do the niceties, but there's this cultural upholding in certain, and if you're just not aware, or if you weren't told that, you weren't supposed to look, you're supposed to look down. Asians don't look at people directly in their eyes. And that's not 100%, the case, but that was a cultural nuance that if you were now internationally traveling for business and your company had an office in Asia, and you're like, hey, and they're like, so offensive things, how to eat, those are all things that we have to learn, right? I had to learn how to use chopsticks. My mom, every time we'd go to an Asian restaurant, she's like, no fork for you. And so in the beginning, I was stabbing it with the, just so I could eat. But I'm thankful now, because when I go to Asia, or if I go to, a Chinese restaurant, etc., I can eat, down to a grain of rice, where before I couldn't. But it's stuff you have to learn. And that's still about our history. It's still about everyone's culture. That doesn't mean you have to love it and live it every day. But if you know someone, or you're going to be going to a place, or people are coming to a meeting, or you're going to a school, every school in New York has about 30 or so languages being spoken in a public school. And so you just have to be culturally aware, like, oh, I can't get Miss So-and-so to come to my parent teacher night. Well, maybe because they're working, and you should pay attention to possibly what they do, like what they're like. So parent teacher night does not always work for everyone. It used to work back in the day, right? And for one group that used to live in that community, now you have different. So Bennie, I feel like this just, there's just so many layers to it, and it's everyday things. And so that's why diversity is going nowhere. Diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging is here to stay. It's just, how do you embrace it into your own life? How does your company, if you work for a company, or if you own one, how are you embracing it? I specifically during COVID was looking for women-owned businesses. I bought black toilet paper during the toilet paper fiasco called Real. We all don't have to use Scott tissue, right? And it's the idea of how forward can you think? Like, why doesn't a Hilton, a Hyatt, a Marriott shift from a Scott tissue to Real? It's made with bamboo. It's better for the environment. That's your ESG. That's your CSR. It's very simple. But people, they have a 10-year contract with Scott, and it's a good one, I'm sure. So, but that was what I do. That's what I chose. And that's why it still comes down to an individual, and then the leadership of who's running a company or an organization. And then it's really those who are trying to get a piece of that pie who have to do some of the work, and I saw in the clip that I'm in the clip when we first met, and you had me doing this workshop about not taking on too much, that I take on so much. But now that you hear a little bit of my story, I feel like I take on a lot, because there's a lot to take on, but you do need to know where to let go. And I feel like some of these laws, policies, and all that give people that space potentially to do what they were doing anyway, but to have a backing, right? Like, oh, well, they say I don't have to do it, so I don't have to anymore. I was trying to do it, but it really wasn't working. But maybe it's like, it's always on that other side of some of the work that you need to do a little bit more.
I love it. We're going to have you back on this show, because we're getting down to the time. It's so amazing how you have so much fun when the conversation is powerful and good. Let's pivot a little bit and discuss the importance of recognizing and addressing, the intersecting forms of discrimination and privilege, in creating more inclusive environments. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, just you and I sitting here today, I feel like there's definitely still, I am the co-president of Women's Media Group. I'm the first Black co-president of that organization, and we will be celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. And sometimes you have to be that change. Sometimes you need to step up and do that. And it's in media, where it was still, the gatekeepers were white men. It started out in publishing, and now media is so worldwide. You were talking about technology, digital versions of everything. So seeing how women are breaking ceilings there, right? Seeing how people of color are moving into places and spaces that we haven't been before, but really breaking ground, whether or not in sports, technology, innovation, venture capital. We are every place that we need to be. And so when you do have this intersectionality of people, mixed race, multicultural, more than two races, it's easier possibly to break some of those barriers. But then the other part is, how do you identify as yourself? I consider myself to be biracial. That does not make me not Black. And I am Black and something. And then there's some folks that just embrace that. And so I feel like these intersectionalities cut across so many areas: race, gender, culture, class, and then now generations, that it will always be something that's there and something to talk about. But I feel like people need to put some effort into it. And that's why I created Blended, because I want there to be a platform of positivity. There's a lot of negative stuff out there, but good stuff, but just like a mix of things, like the happy biracial babies, Black men who date white women who date everyone else, blah, blah. Like there's all these things, but it's like, and none of it's awful, right? I need to figure out what to do with my hair. My mom's sister and my grandmother were both beauticians and had hair salons, but they didn't know what to do with me. But luckily my hair was, according to my Black grandmother, good hair. So it could still do what white hair could do. I still got my bun for ballet, but as you can see, it's curly now, right? So, and so you start growing up in those things. So the more you can have these conversations, the more you can go in and learn someone's story, I think it then will start to unfold where we can actually make more leadway and really look at the positivity and the profitability of diversity.
Man, I'm loving this conversation. So let's talk about it. We're getting down to the last few minutes, but there's two questions I want to ask you. One, how responsible do you think the media is for creating the narrative of all of these different biases that we come across? Because a lot of times in media, and that's the reason why I got into media, because instead of complaining about it, I wanted to do something about it, so I created a magazine that shows us in and out highlight. I created a podcast network that allowed us to have our conversations, you understand, and a couple other things that we're working on. One thing I often hear Byron Allen talk about is the difference in even advertising dollars coming to us as the media, which depicts, this guy owns the Weather Channel, you know what I mean? And I remember him saying about like even the ads, he made a time he said that like I think he pulled out like a Black enterprise or something like that, maybe getting 15,000 for an ad, whereas a Forbes, or not a Forbes, but a Vogue, was getting like 150,000 for the same one-page ad. And, he even talked about how a lot of the dollars don't come back to him because of him owning, the Weather Channel and these other entertainment aspects. What is your thoughts on that? The media controlling the narrative and still Black-owned media companies, not getting the same amount dollar and support as non-Black media companies.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a struggle bus, as you know, in media in general. But what I always think about, you got to bring things back to that are personal to you. I grew up knowing the Graves family, so Black Enterprise, Mr. Graves Sr. and the sons, and now Butch is running the magazine. And I remember him saying to his team, and some of them were my friends, that he was like, you can't use Black as an excuse to not get dollars. You're going to be Black. And you just have to convince them that what you're offering them is of value, right? And as much as I mean, from the Essence to your magazine to Jet and Jet Ebony Jr. back in the day, all those were so important for you to see yourself in things. But when you are me, it's hard. It's not that I'm not Black, but there's also things that I don't identify with because it's not part of my full Black experience. But when I used to watch the Jeffersons, I was looking for Jenny because Jenny was me, right? But she didn't show up a lot. And then, she ended up marrying Lionel and still didn't show up a lot, right? But everyone has their kind of look into that, right? So even in Blackish, Rainbow is a rainbow, right? So she's Tracy Ellis Ross, who really grew up also biracial, right? And understanding where, like, there's like things that, either you miss, you don't get, but it's not because you're not Black enough. It's something you haven't been exposed to. And I hope that people use that as that experience. Just like I was a network journal 40 under 40. And I wondered, well, if I wasn't half Black, I would have never had that. Would I have to have been the 40 under 40 for Cranes if I was just white? or something else, right? So I think that they're all important and that they shouldn't really be lesser. But if you are only speaking to one population, right, then possibly it is lesser of what someone's ROI will be versus it being something that is now focused towards more people. So some of the diversity, when you looked at ads of adding, plus size people, not just anorexic looking, thin, frail folks, right? Changing right, beautiful. And then now freckles are cool. They weren't cool before. Funky hair wasn't cool. Now it's cool. So being more innovative to pull more people in, even if you are a magazine of color or you are just a hair magazine, right? Or you are just a something like whatever those little special things are, right? Just to find, like, everyone doesn't read Barron's, everyone doesn't read, but you know who's reading it. And if those people are reading that stuff or looking on your website or looking at your digital page, then you still want eyeballs there. And the more eyeballs that you can show that are going to look like yours and mine. And that's why this multicultural community is important, because my eyeballs are looking at twice the things just to understand where I stand and stuff. Like, there's girls and then there's insecure. And I'm some of both. I grew up in New York. I kind of also grew up in LA because of school. But some of the stuff that Issa Rae talks about doesn't directly apply to me. And neither does some of all the stuff in girls. But the New York experience was more my experience than the LA, right? So I need multiple stories to make up my one story. Where sometimes, I used to always think, God, what if I was just Black? Like, how would I see the world? And if I was just white, how would I see the world? But I'm not, and I don't get that break. I had slave owners, and then I have slaves on the other, it's just hard. It's hard. And so I'm always looking through a different lens. And even tonight you get my glasses, but it's the idea that there's not just one story, even if you are of one culture, that where you grew up, what your parents did, the socioeconomics changed then, like something is going to still change your experience from someone else's. There's always a differentiator. But when it lives in your house and looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. There are different things that you're going to see and be exposed to.
All right. So
that's where we need to live.
I'm sorry, but we're about to run out of time, but I want to make sure you get this. We got a few more minutes. We're going to have to bring you back because I didn't know you was filled with so much information, so much good and powerful information. So Jodi, tell us a little bit about your platform, Blended, what it's all about, and how can people be a part of it? I want to make sure we get this in.
Well, it's still in its formation. The idea is I'm still gathering all the different positive platforms that are already out there and exist, and or creating some. There will be a film festival as well, because I want people to talk about these intersectionalities. So for now, it's just, I do have an Instagram page, which is I Am Blended, which it's Blend, BLENDID for identity. And
nice. I like that.
The sooner I planned, everything should be up this summer in June. Between now and then, I've started collecting a lot of data for this and people who are working on different parts of it to bring community. And also, I don't want it to be all digital, since I am of my generation. I still think that there's a lot of positivity in actual live connectivity. So the film festival, I will have a podcast. Those will start being taped in the next month or so. So I will welcome you guys then. And hopefully we'll return here with you, Bennie, to let you know. And vice versa, I want to have you on my podcast when that all happens, because it's also, you've impacted so many different people's lives with what you do that don't look like you, that do look like you. And so that's my purpose. It's like the stuff that's good, you just want the best person. I don't care if a Jewish man teaches me about Paul Robeson like he did at UCLA. There was a Jewish professor and everyone's like, oh, how's this white guy going to teach us about? I'm like, until you get your PhD and you can teach this course, right now you need to listen to this man. It's about getting the best information and the best quality education and the best quality, whatever it is that you want for yourself. And I don't care who's made it, because I'm going to be the user. right? And eventually I can make it. And so I want people to switch that script a little. So for me, follow me now. I'm Friends of Jodi, become an FOJ. And I would say I will definitely start dropping some of the hints of what's coming next as they unfold. But thank you for this opportunity. I do feel like diversity is alive and well. Don't let anyone fool you. It's just under different disguises and popping up in different places. And policies and organizations are not going to completely change that.
I love it. So just once again, if people want to reach out to you, they want to know more about you, maybe they want to book you to come and speak to their organization, how can they do that?
You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can also go to niaraconsulting.com.
Okay, just like that. And once again, Jodi, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your business schedule to come and talk with us, because we want to be able to give people interesting viewpoints from all over the globe. And I love that you're so passionate about this. I love that you're so full of information, as we like to say back in the church days, you know what I mean? And
Yes.
that's a beautiful thing. And we definitely got to have you back. And when you release Blended to the World, please put us on that list to come back and talk about it, share it with our audience. And, because we always want to support those who want to widen the spectrum of point of views. And I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me, Bennie. It was a pleasure.
And with that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, what we try to do, and we try to do it every day and every week, is bring you powerful entrepreneurs who are willing to share and help you understand those things that may not be as clear as you think they should be. And it's great to have different perspectives, that we bring to the forefront, because in this world of this digital landscape, there's a lot of good stuff out there, but there's also a lot of bad stuff out there. And being able to get through it, shows like this allow you to speak to the source and the core of a lot of things that you may not understand. I'm Bennie Randall Jr., aka The Motivator, aka Global Entrepreneur and Investor. And it is my humble pleasure that you allow me into your hearts and your homes. And we'll see you next time. Learn more about me at BennieRandall.com. I'll go to Vanoy.com to get this show and a whole lot of other shows and audio books right here for you. Until next time, and I want you to come here. I love you, and you can't do a damn thing about it. Good night.